saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David coming back at you with the Wolf Pack, or Carl the Sound Guy. It's been an eventful morning. Carl's already screwed up once. Oh, the over-under on this was 3.
4.
I'm still taking the over. We have a great show for you today. A little different than just your block and tackle, business in, business out. A real American war hero, in my opinion. I'm sure that makes him uncomfortable, as it would any war hero, but we have Matt Eversman with us. Matt is a partner at Eversmann Advisory. Eversmann Advisory is a veteran-owned and operated organization with a diverse range of strategic partners who develop employment initiatives. They train exceptionally talented men and women to be more competitive in the market. Matt is also co-author of 2 books with James Patterson. Yes, that James Patterson. Very, very big author and best-selling author of many books. What are they called, Carl? What are the books? Fuck Up Number 2. All right. Matt's latest book, which he sent me an early copy of, and I'm very thankful for, is ER Nurses, True Stories of America's Greatest Unsung Heroes. They save our lives every day, and we never heard their stories. The life or death intensity on the working front lines of America's greatest unsung heroes. Matt's also been a part of Walk in My Combat Boots, True Stories of American Bravest Warriors. They're brutally honest stories, usually only shared among combat comrades in arms. We all know how it's tough to get somebody to talk about combat if you've not been there with them. This kind of gets you there. And voices of men and women who fought in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and rare eye-opening look into wearing a uniform, fighting in combat, losing friends, and coming home, and what it's really like to come home. Matt has been featured in a 2018 documentary, Send Me, though in Carl's notes, it says 2108 PBS documentary. That's number 3. So in the future, Matt will be in a documentary. Send Me follows as he returns to combat with a U.S. team of military and fights against ISIS and the Taliban. The film provides an insider's look at the lives and activity of U.S. military personnel stationed in far-flung outposts and overseas. I think what most people really know Matt for is the Battle of Mogadishu. First-hand accounts of men in Task Force Ranger, which was a book written with Dan Schilling. Matt Eversman, as many of you who have seen Black Hawk Down, was portrayed by Josh Hartnett, who was kind of the heart and soul of that movie. And I really thought did a great job. I think that whole movie was a wonderful movie. One I didn't go in with a lot of expectations, and I came out just with a ton of respect. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm sorry for all the listeners that had to listen to that introduction, because I'm just a knucklehead. But I thank you for having me, and it's cool to be here and to talk with really smart people about the state of business and the state of things. And hey, man, we're all on this side of the grass right now, and that's a good thing.
Well, I'd love to have smart people for you to talk to, but you've got Carl and I, so we'll muddle through. And you are everything I expect. I kind of come from a military family. My stepfather retired a command sergeant major. I would expect you to be as humble as you are, because he is too. But let's talk about the book. As you sent me this book, and I've never really seen anything, firsthand accounts of ER nurses. And these are a collection of small stories, right? It's not about following one business or one person. What brought you to write this story with James Patterson?
Yeah, so I wish I could take great credit for it, but this was literally Jim Patterson's idea. And, backing up, we, in 30 seconds, we had been introduced by a mutual friend down here in South Florida right before I went to Afghanistan for this little documentary. And the whole reason we were together was to talk about how do you tell stories? So go find the best storyteller in the world and see what he has to say. And so landed this plane on the short runway. I got back after doing this little film for PBS, and Jim called me up out of the blue. He says, "Hey, I think we ought to do a book about soldiers. We ought to, it's below the fold. We ought to introduce soldiers to the world." So you say yes, nod, Roger, I'll do it, which we'll get back to later. But anyway, even as we were doing that, pre-COVID, Jim and I were just chatting, and he said, I think emergency room nurses, he's like that. It's just a part of our, it's a part of the doggone, our cities, and nobody really even thinks about it. Just that you go and when you're broken and you come back. And at first I'm like, well, how many stories can you hear about life in the emergency room? But as it turns out, there's
a lot.
There's an awful lot. And, it is Adele to Zeppelin. You got it all. And we really just found that it was startling what these men and women do day in, day out for however long their careers are. So I thought it was fascinating. It was a neat project. And I'm very pleased to say, and I'm sorry to be sort of a tool for saying it out loud, but I'm very pleased to say that we made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. We're very thankful for that.
Cue the applause, Carl. That's four. That is four. We are now at a push, Matt. We are now at a push. I took the over. Congratulations on being a bestseller. That's familiar territory for you. But you wouldn't think that you could put out a book about a collection of stories of ER nurses and within days it's a bestseller. But it really is a very good book. I actually had the displeasure of reading it in an emergency room.
Yeah.
In a hospital. And I just looked around at these people in awe at what they had to deal with, not the least of which family members like myself who were with a loved one. But the stories of life and death and how it affects you from the beginning and then how you're just desensitized to it in the end is sad.
Yeah, it really is. It is. It's funny, not funny, but when you were just saying that, I was thinking, this is one of those head scratching moments too. Like when soldiers at Walter Reed would tell me, yeah, we watched a movie last night. We watched Black Hawk Down. And I'm thinking, you showed this movie to people at Walter Reed that are recovering from movie, but they're like, yeah. Hey, I get it. And young kid, grandmother's like, oh, my grandson's favorite movie is Black Hawk Down. He's 10. I'm like, my gosh, lady, this is, it's violent. It's where I'm going with all this. It's violent. It's rough. It's, it is doggone unvarnished. And when you get to talk about nurses in the emergency room, you can't paint the corner. You can't go across the outside of the plate. It is three things happen. You go in, you get fixed, you come out, you go in, you get kind of fixed, they send you up to ICU, or you go in and you die. Not to sound cavalier, cheeky, but that's what happens. And somebody orchestrates that all the time.
Those are three outcomes generally that can happen. But the stories in between, to me, there are a lot of stories about people who were in a traumatic situation, kind of a blood and guts thing. But then there's also I think there was this nurse, the very first Foley catheter that they ever had to put in was a 400-pound guy covered in shit.
Yeah.
That's got to be as horrific as blood and guts, right?
Oh, yeah. No, it's just, as Jim said, the other day, he said, if you were asking me, I'm just pretending I'm Jim Patterson for a second. And if you asked me, write a story kind of about the underbelly of America, I wouldn't know where to begin. But after looking at this book, he's like, now I know, go to the ER. You'll see, right. You see everything. You just see it all. Like you just said, it's like, wow, man, how do you even begin to digest that? But these men and women do it. And I guess that's really they're angels among us. They really are.
Yeah. My wife's mother was a ER nurse for almost 40 years. And you want to talk about battle hardened.
Oh, yeah.
There wasn't a part of an anatomy she hadn't seen 1,000 times or any kind of malady. I think her old line is whenever she had 6 kids, whenever any of them complained about anything, the first thing she'd say, did you go to the bathroom? That was like, the old grandmother line, are you regular? Yeah.
Did you put some tussin on it?
Yeah. Did you put some tussin on it? Yeah. I recommend the book. Honestly, I got halfway through it because I couldn't read anymore from an ER room. What I did read of it just gave me a great amount of respect for the individuals that work in this. Not that I didn't have that based on my mother-in-law alone, but you should pick it up. It's ER Nurses, one of the most powerful books that you'll read all year. I know that because it says it right on the cover.
I know it's the trite question, the one that people always ask, but the process one. What was it like writing with? And by the way, Alex Cross. I do know what James Patterson wrote.
You were on the computer, silly.
What was the process like with Patterson? I mean, I just kind of have this weird vision of him in a velvet robe, just kind of with a pipe, just walking around a library with all these leather-bound books, just kind of dictating out.
That's funny. That is good. No, Jim, first of all, I preface it by saying Jim Patterson he's a neat guy. And I say that, I meet a lot of people in the military. He's not what you would think, that the best-selling author in the world is like. He's very, very down to earth, very, very much, I dare say, a regular guy. Jeans and a baseball cap is generally the uniform he's in. But to answer the question, the process, it started out with, on my side of the line, was to find these nurses and do an interview. And once I got it, and you figure a 60 to 90-minute interview roughly comes out to about 40 pages. Then I read through it, and I'm giving myself more credit than I really deserve, because my piece is pretty much monkey boy stuff. I read it, look through, and see what pieces are potentially interesting, and then I print it out, take it over to Jim's house like the paper boy each week, and and then he starts working the magic. And what's fascinating, and I know it may sound very basic, but there's so much behind it, this idea that a guy could take a 40-page manuscript of someone's entire career and whittle it down to 5 or 6 pages of an opening that hooks you, and 4, 5, 6 pages that keeps you engaged, and then you're done, and you feel like you've got this whole person's story by the scruff of its neck. I mean, it's really even as I'm saying it, and this is about the millionth time I've said it, I'm really amazed at how he does it, because if it was that easy, we'd all do it and we'd all be, bestsellers, but it's not. It's the way he does it. And I will say it's sort of this other stream of consciousness kind of a guy. Like, I don't know how you see the world like that, but you see it in a much different way. And, God love him for it. I mean, that's what he is, as they say, the man. Yeah.
Look, he's done it all. And this is very a different kind of departure from what he usually does, putting it in short stories. And it's nice to know that, he's not that vividly homoerotic description that Carl put out there. That he's just a regular guy.
And Dan, if I could just I gotta throw this out too, because this is something I learned about, over the last couple of years of working with James Patterson, is that, if there's one mission the guy has in life, it is to get people to read.
Yeah.
And that's no BS. I mean, legitimately, it is the idea that we don't read enough. People need to read. We've been feeding them the wrong stories for, sort of all of our lifetime. So this idea and the example he gives, and I think it's a good one for all of us to kind of marinate over when we think about business and life. But, he's like, I write kids' books so that when they get to the last page, I want them to turn around to their mother or father and say, Mom, Dad, I'm ready for another one. Like that's the idea, and literacy and on and on. So not to get on the stump for Jim Patterson, but I don't know that I had any noble idea like that, other than, hey, this would be kind of cool. This would be neat. These are stories that should be told. And
yeah, I'm not, and it's a really cool thing. I mean, a chance introduction brings you to this kind of full-time and part-time job next to your advisory of being an author with James Patterson. Who wouldn't want that? That's a pretty cool gig, right?
it's, I pinch myself. I do. I sit here every day, and I think this is of all the gin joints,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of gin joints, Somalia.
Yeah.
I mean, so I agree with a lot of the people who say Black Hawk Down is just one of the best movies put together, following people on the ground. I know it had to be really tough for you to watch for a couple of different reasons. One, the movie is kind of based on your narrative that follows you as the lead protagonist through that whole event. And there's so many things that because it comes at you so fast once it starts, right? Once Orlando Bloom falls out of a helicopter, like, it doesn't stop, which,
right.
If it was Orlando Bloom, I'd be okay. But unfortunately, it was your friend. And that had to be really tough for you to, like, kind of look back and see in the moment, right? Boom, he's gone.
Yeah. It's an interesting, this whole movie world and being involved, as the name that gets turned into a character is absurd. It really is. And, I've had a couple of years now to kind of talk about it and digest it and think. I mean, the movie came out
almost 20,
literally 20 years ago. It came out December of 20.
Yeah, still holds up.
2001. Yeah, no, it's on the doggone, like, Showtime periodically.
Oh, yeah.
And I must admit, I've kind of seen it enough that it's like, man, I can't watch this thing again. I mean, every single one of your friends is like, hey, I'm waiting to see the movie with you, which is certainly flattering. But, by about the 17th time, you're like, man, this is exhausting.
Yeah.
And for listeners, I'm saying that 20 years later, smiling, but
they want to see it with you and, like, ask you, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Kind of like I'm doing, except not watching it with you.
Exactly.
I guess that would be cool.
But it's so the short answer is, I was very fortunate to be involved, and I'm putting quotes on either side of that. When they started doing the movie, I got invited out to read the first draft of the screenplay and really get a talk through by Jerry Bruckheimer and Ridley Scott and Mark Bowden, how they were going to do this. And then I got to go on the set in Morocco for a week while they were filming. So I really had this opportunity to kind of see it from inside, how the story was going to go. And I think because you kind of know, I know how the ending is.
You were there.
Could watch it sort of objectively, and I agree with you. It's well done, even for a movie that's 20 years old with the technology that has changed throughout. It's still a really good story. And my kind of closing comment, and I've said this to a million people, even after 20 years of war, if you want to know what urban battle is like, watch Black Hawk Down. It's probably the best visual of what it's like to fight, in a built-up area. And that's what our kids were doing in Fallujah. That's what they were doing in Baghdad. That's what they were doing in Kabul. And so it really was, it was well done.
Yeah, it was the urban battle of it. Like, around every corner lies death.
Yeah,
that really hooked me. I guess I appreciate the movie making part of it. I mean, gosh, Ridley Scott, Mark Bowden. I mean, fantastic. I mean, I could have done without Michael Bay. I'm not sure I ever needed to meet him, or I guess you did. But they're fantastic. Going back to it, I mean, me wanting to be that friend of yours in a room watching that movie with you. I guess everybody was only there for a couple of weeks. It's not like you had been there for a year developing relationships yourself. You did come in as kind of a heart and a soul and seeing the strife that people had to deal with, the abject poverty, and you felt for that. But at the same time, death lurked around every corner. And I guess you were there for like maybe 2 weeks before this operation. The whole unit was really the Rangers, right?
So it was what they call in forgive me because I've forgotten so much military doctrinal stuff. So anybody that's on active duty listening, I'm apologizing up front that I forgot the doctrine. But we had what they call like a joint special operations task force, just SOTF. Yeah, that's what it was. So this was like elements of Rangers, elements of SEALs, elements of Delta Force, and elements of the aviation unit all put together for this mission. Because, you got to plan for other contingencies around the world, and just to not take it too far back on a history lesson, at the time with the Clinton administration and the foreign policy that they had such that it was, there was a very, very delicate, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, they didn't want to broadcast the wrong message that, by sending a lot of guys over there to capture or kill this dude. So, that would because this is happening in the middle of a humanitarian, peacekeeping operation.
Well, I think that gets lost on people too. This was really over food, right?
Yeah, no, listen, it was starvation, malnutrition, all the maladies of life in sub-Saharan Africa, in the 90s, in a failed state of a country that literally was.
And a warlord stealing all the UN food coming in.
Yep. I mean, literally that simple. Genocide, civil war, and just sheer brutality by these warlords and basically terrorists.
Yeah, Adid in particular was the one you guys were after, a couple of his top lieutenants. And yeah, it struck me. You guys are there a couple of weeks. I mean, did you really get your own chalk because your leader went down with a seizure or something like right before?
No, that's one of those great Hollywood isms where we put a couple of things together. We did have a soldier who turns out had an epileptic seizure. And it turns out the guy had hidden.
But he wasn't your chalk leader.
No, he had hidden that in his medical records somehow. And anyway, he seized up literally over there, and that was that. But my boss, my chalk leader, Chris Hardy, he actually did get called home right before, like at the end of September, for a Red Cross emergency, which, no one, whoever thinks about that. But, his mother had a bad diagnosis, and, they're like, you got to get home. So it wasn't through anything good that I did. It was just happened to be the next guy, standing there.
All right. So it wasn't somebody having a seizure and going down, but the chalk leader did get sent out, and this was your first chalk leader mission.
Yep.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And I say this, and I also got to preface this, and I'm sorry, it's going to drive you nuts, but, it's easy. Here we are 28 years later to have a conversation like you and I are having, Dan, and the highs and the lows and ins and outs and smile and joke, but I can tell you, it's a really scary proposition. And you also got to make sure we're not making the fish story bigger or smaller sometimes than it was, and try and be straight up the gut. But this. Well,
I mean, that's for the movie to do. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I think that like people talking and hearing from you maybe do want. I mean, look, that's still an amazing thing. That like, I mean, was this the first time you had to fire your weapon in live combat?
That day was the first for me. We had been in a couple of firefights prior to, but interestingly enough, like I never, in my particular position, like I never saw anybody to shoot, which I guess is a good thing.
Yeah.
October 3rd, though, is the first time I did that I had to shoot. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, had to shoot a lot. But yeah, that was my first time as a leader in combat. And, that's a big deal.
And your first time shooting at live targets, shooting back at you.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I mean, and it is one of those, it's an odd sensation. It is exciting in one sense. It's scary in one sense. But I tell you the funny thing, just as I'm standing here kind of chatting, it wasn't paralyzing like you would think.
No, your training kicks in.
I mean, it really wasn't. You would. I mean, I would have thought like, oh my gosh, holy shit, they're shooting at me and stop. But it really was like once you realize, you hear it, your senses come in, you naturally get behind something that'll hopefully stop bullets, and you sit there and think, wow, man. Like you spend a little bit of time, it's probably just a nanosecond thing, like, so that's what it's really like.
Yeah.
And again, it's all of the above, but the biggest thing I remember about it was that it wasn't paralyzing. It wouldn't stop you in fear. And from all the guys I saw, I didn't see anybody. And again, that's not bravado. That's just, It's just not what you would think.
No, I guess you'd have that 1 millisecond where you're like, did that motherfucker just shoot at me?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah. No, you do.
It's on.
It gets real personal real quick.
Yeah.
And I mean, you from the minute you roped down, you were dealing with a medical emergency.
Yeah.
I mean, in the open, not really having time to think about, who's shooting at you. Everybody is. That's crazy. And you're talking about the ER book that you wrote. You were involved in an ER incident, right, with Private Pilla, who had his femoral artery severed.
Hollywood stuff that really did happen, but it wasn't me. It was another real life sergeant that did that. Yeah, that was artery was severed, and actually it was Jamie Smith. Excuse me, it was Smith who's they couldn't get a clamp in, so they had to do it by hand, which just
Oh my God,
brutal.
Under fire.
Even to this day, you think about it, but then again, you also like it's amazing. This is what 20-somethings do. Like that's what these men and women today do, and that's what they're capable. They're magnificent creatures. These soldiers that just do so much.
Well, wait a minute. You were a 20-something when that was done.
I was 26.
Yeah,
it's shocking now. I got 26. I was still chewing on erasers and sniffing glue.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy.
Right, which is exactly what 26-year-olds do today. So, I mean, I was asking, there was one part of this where somebody had said we're not going to get the AC-130 gunship, which, I mean, I know what that is, and I'm just wondering, what could an AC-130 gunship do in a densely populated area like that, except eviscerate buildings?
Shockingly, it has got a pretty good. It can put some pretty precise fire down. Even in 1993, it had the technology to put it down. And yeah, you could level Mogadishu if you really wanted to. But I think tactically it would provide tremendous, very accurate supporting fire. Like the convoys, we could have cleared the streets. Cleared by fire. Literally, we could have protected.
That would have been pretty indiscriminate, though, don't you think? I mean, like you guys were pretty careful, and it did happen. I mean, women and children got shot because there were thousands that were killed on the Somali side. But you put an AC-130 gunship clearing out a street, everybody's dead.
Pretty much, the but comma is. For instance, at the crash site, like if you're running into the crash site and you're not wearing an American flag, you're a bad guy and you're going to die. We're going to send you to Never Never Land. And so that really, this ability to protect those crash sites, would have given us more time to regroup and get better armor, get the armor organized. But and listen, just to go out, we used to say, listen, even if they were just lobbing 105 rounds into the desert, they're so doggone loud. I mean, that literally would have had an effect, on these people. So yeah, it's definitely an asset we should have had. It was pretty criminal that we didn't. And yeah, it could. I mean, who should have, could have? Who knows? But I would suggest it would have changed a lot of the outcome.
It would have cleared out those broken down cars and tires that were blocking the convoy's exit for sure.
Yeah, no, it would have done business. But no, they're pretty precise. Like put targeted 30 millimeter rounds through windows instead of taking down the whole door or the whole outside of a building. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. If you ever get a chance to go watch them shoot, you should. You probably do it over at Indiantown Gap or something.
I've seen them shoot, and there's nothing like seeing a uranium depleted round go through something, because it does. It goes through it.
Pure kinetic energy.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess you really did need an AC-130 gunship. I mean, those little birds were very, very cool with the Gatling guns, and they could strike the top of a building. I see you shaking your head. Absolutely. I guess you were happy to hear them go overhead.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, that was the, necessity of invention here. Those little birds and the Blackhawks just flying in orbits around with the miniguns were lifesavers. I mean, those miniguns, they shoot 4,000 rounds a minute, 6-barreled electronically primed miniguns out of both sides. I mean, they're just awesome. I mean, psychologically, it's you get fired up that you're, no pun intended, in the middle of a firefight, and all of a sudden you hear that whine of the miniguns come, and all of a sudden people stop shooting.
Oh my God.
People like bad guys stop shooting because they're just taking them out. It's incredible.
The balls you have to be a Somali to be out there.
That's a really great observation. And I'm not trying to be a kiss ass when I say, because when people are like, oh, really good, Dan, but it really was for a Westerner, we run away from conflict. We leave,
as one does,
dangerous stuff as normal people do.
Yeah.
They come out of the houses just to see what's up, and you kind of get to figure out like who means business and means you harm, and who's just checking out. But at first you think, holy shit, these people are drawn,
to gunfire,
to the sound of gunfire, and you're like women with their kids on their hip, just walk out and literally while there's a firefight going on, looking around. You're like, holy mackerel, this is, you don't see that every day. I mean, not in.
Well, apparently they do, Matt, because if they didn't, I'm not sure they would be drawn to it. It seems like this was something extraordinary for all of them, but not in the sense that gunfire was going off. Maybe just a lot more than usual. And I did when I watched it. I'm like, who are these guys? No armor. I mean, shorts, T-shirts, and an AK-47 was pretty much standard operating procedure and equipment for them, running into a military buzzsaw. And they did.
Yep.
Thousands of them.
I tell you, again, another one of those ones for Ripley. But, this is a country that they don't know they don't know any different.
Yeah.
I think is what they talk about, them all high on cot, which is true as well. But they're pretty much fearless. And, as I've since done a little bit of study about Somalia. I mean, I didn't know anything about it going in, but afterwards, and, they've been like this for millennia. And, they sell camels, chase Somali women, and like to fight. That's what one of the CIA guys said. That's what happens
not necessarily
Mogadishu.
In that order.
Exactly, but that is it. But they fight. They're not. They know nothing other than fighting. So, and again, you would think this intimidating force of Americans, the best of the best, would come in, and this ragtag group of militiamen would leave, but they wouldn't. They'll stay and fight, as poorly trained and armed as they were.
Bro, you were no different than anybody over 1,000 years coming in there and killing these people, I guess. I mean, even the Crusades affected that to some degree, right? They're now predominantly and were then a Islamic State, which I'm sure didn't make them feel very good about a Christian army coming in and shooting at them on just a base level, right? Where you can get the non-educated to fight for a reason, but they're used to that, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's their trade. That's it's just what I think that somebody said. there's a famous Somali, whoever that may have been, that said, we push the invaders into the ocean. That's what we do. And they basically have no thought of capitulation, no thought of truces, no thought of anything. I mean, listen, when you start dealing with these clans, it's just like what we've seen in Afghanistan. I mean, this shouldn't surprise anyone, about how they behaved, how they believe their views on life. This idea that, a child dies is kind of, it happens, but an elder dies, like, horrible, like all that wisdom and everything is gone. And
Wow.
Again, for a Westerner, and I keep going back to sound smarter than I am, but it's anathema to everything any of us have been taught growing up here in the United States. Just that behavior is just, I mean, it's just it's not ours. It's just not the way we see it. We value life in general, except in some places like Baltimore. But it is amazing.
I told you, bro. You're not going to one up me. I'm from Flint.
I know it's like the battle of the hoods.
Yeah, I mean, look, even here to a degree go the other way. 8-year-olds are getting arrested for fighting on the playground. So I'm not sure that happens in Somalia even today. I know they're a little further ahead than they were 20 years ago, but not so much, I think. So, Carl, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of listening to it and kind of digesting it afterwards, in the way you described their run towards the fight, it seems to me that it didn't matter who it was. There's that action, they're going to run forward, and in that tribal mentality, that's their spot to win honor or renown or advance their place within that grouping. So I would probably say a percentage of them didn't even know they were running towards the Americans. They were just running towards a fight and like just shoot. And it just happened that they saw the Americans on the other side.
I think they knew they were Americans. What do you think? What do you think, Matt?
I think that there's probably a little split of both. I think there's probably, and I'm no tribe expert, but my suspicion is, listen, anything you do to gains favor. It's going to be good when there's food or money on the other end of that transaction. But they also, listen, it was very obvious, for the time we had been, from the time we got there, there was a group of Somalis. And it was almost like there was a demilitarized zone. You would fly over or do a foot patrol, and families would come out genuinely happy to see the Americans there, because they knew that we were going to, provide some comfort, provide relief was actually the name of the operation, this U.S. peacekeeping piece. And then you would cross over literally this invisible line, and these kids would come out and throw rocks at you, and women would
Bakara Market
would just give you, the finger, and they'd pretend to be shooting at you. And you think like, how is this? So I think there was the group that was always ready to go fight Americans. And there was also just the loyalists, would be my guess, that are here. I got to think everybody probably knew that who was who in that zoo.
Yeah, I think they did too. That's screw up number 5, Carl. I won the over. I think they did a good job in the movie of showing what you just said, Matt, in that, like, one, there's humanity. There are humans on each side. There's that really impactful scene where one of the soldiers is running through a home, slips out the back door, and a Somali son kills his father. And friendly fire kind of a thing, and just is devastated by it. I don't know if that really happened or not, but it could. And then when you're saying there were some there that really wanted you there, you kind of saw that in the last mile of your run back to the stadium, where you'd crossed over some point and then people were cheering. Mm-hmm. The soldiers. I don't know if you actually ran out of there with the rest of them, or is that Hollywood? But some people ran out, right?
Yeah, no, I did not. I got out on a vehicle, but some guys, there was a dozen or so, I think, if I recall, that wound up literally running behind the vehicles to get out, which we laugh about now, but it wasn't very funny at the time.
Oh, I would not have been laughing.
But it was just as you described. The same, like I just said, you'd drive and then all of a sudden they would just stop. the firing would stop. Everything would just be, peaceful is not the word, but comparatively speaking, it was like, wow, this is really crazy. No one's shooting, and you're just sort of looking around like, I can't believe that after being in this really intense gunfight, all of a sudden it just stopped.
Yeah.
It's indescribable, actually. It was crazy.
How far do those guys have to run? Those dozen guys or so. I mean,
I think, they call it the Mogadishu Mile, but I think it was about 800 meters.
From the crash site to the stadium?
Yeah.
You guys all night long couldn't make it 800 meters from the crash site to the stadium? That's how much fire you were under?
Yeah, we couldn't get the vehicles in. And plus we had to take the helicopter apart to get the bodies out, which takes a lot of time, cutting through Kevlar.
I mean, by my count, that took like 5 hours. The 10th Mountain got there about 11:30 p.m., and you guys were kind of running out of there, gathered out of there around 5 a.m. I mean, look, I don't know if this is Hollywood or whatever from what I saw, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I have to look at the timeline. I can't remember exactly. I just know that extricating the bodies of the pilots was really the holdup. Just didn't have the tools to cut through the Kevlar and everything. And remember, I mean, the nose of this Black Hawk folded over the cockpit, and almost like trying to cut it apart by hand. Basically, is what they did.
The movie closed with kind of like your character giving like kind of this speech, and it was talking about, did anything change? And it was, nothing changed in the situation, but it changed the people that were there. And I 28 years later, we look at how we kind of exited Afghanistan, and nothing changed there. I mean, the same kind of deal. It's the same group is in charge, and from kind of your perspective, having gone through that, how did you kind of feel when we exited Afghanistan the way we did?
Oh, it's brutal. I mean, it's just it's a knife in the back. It's a kick to the shins. Fill in the blank, whichever you want to use. But there's no delicate way to say it. I mean, it's painful. You're like, what in the fuck are we doing? When you got to come home and talk to a 23-year-old widow and explain why her husband died, on a foreign land doing, a mission that is supporting the national mission, our grand strategy, only to have it completely just pulled out from under you, and we're changing, we're changing direction. Whether we're talking about Mogadishu and Somalia in 1993 or, Afghanistan. Hey, look, why we can't do it forever. I got it. I understand that. But, just such nothing changed. You're exactly right, Carl. 100%. Nothing changed other than now the Chinese have a great sandbox to play in and mine in, and opium's going to run rampant, and we've got a vacuum for bad guys. And it's going to be a shit show, and we'll be back there someday in the probably not too distant future, walking back over sand that has American blood on it, and that's going to just fucking, pardon my language, but that's just going to be
we're offended,
brutal.
I totally agree, and it seems like these things are all kind of negotiated on terms that we say we don't negotiate on. I mean, you look at the pilot Durant, who was captured, right? And he's like, they're not going to negotiate for my release, yet he's released 2 weeks later and we leave 2 weeks later. It's hard to believe that those two things didn't coincide, that we kind of negotiated with the deed to release Durant because we weren't, I mean, the horrific images of Stuttgart and
Gary Gordon.
Yep. Yeah. And it's not like it is today. They briefly, I think, showed it like maybe 1 or 2 times on the news and mentioned it. I mean, Clinton didn't want to talk about that at all, but those guys, man, you get your hands on those guys. And they were not going to see that happen with Durant, and they were willing to leave over it and did.
Yep. I mean, literally, we cashed in our chips at the sign of blood, and that is. I mean, I got to think that's got to haunt President Clinton. I have to think, I don't know how it couldn't.
It doesn't.
But it is just, it's painful. Like that is painful. We're talking about human lives. We're talking about, sons and daughters, the whole 9 yards. But when you witness it, it's not just a cliche like American sons and daughters. You look at it like these are great, very courageous men and women that are serving. And yeah, we changed our entire foreign policy, over that one incident. And then, if you recall, just to go a little further, just northwest of Mogadishu is this country called Rwanda, and they're knocking off the Hutus and the Tutsis one another like the national pastime, and we don't do shit. We did nothing, zero. Like they would go in at night and like lop people's heads off by the thousands, like 4 places and then a decimal, and we did nothing. Haiti, burning people with tires around their necks, and 3 knuckleheads with a baseball bat turned a whole 7th fleet around. You're like, what are we doing here, man?
Yeah, same thing with Darfur, right?
Yeah, yep.
But you get some shit goes down in Croatia, and those are white people getting killed. So, Clinton's all in. Yeah, and look, I mean, I'm glad you think he loses sleep over what happened in Mogadishu. I think he loses more sleep over Monica Lewinsky. That's just... and not that he's any better or worse than what we've had since on either side, really, because I have to think that, George II or Dick Cheney would have leveled the entire country. Trump may have done the same. I mean, we want something in between. I mean, I think Obama would have done the same thing Clinton did. There's nothing in the middle. There's no middle ground to our policy. It changes every 4 to 8 years completely.
Yep. No, and I'm shaking my head in a circle on that, because you're absolutely right. And listen, I certainly don't have all the answer. I mean, we all like to think what we think we know and about this, but there's also this point where you just have to say, I mean, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And how does what does this do for the good of America? And if we're going to be in, we got to be all in. And if we're not, if we're just going to change our minds every 4 or 8 years, what do you just put a cap on our timeline of military involvement? Like, hey, no more than 4 years? I don't know. But you're right. It's wasteful of brilliant lives.
It's the commitment issue. You have it right there. And the media will play their feigted horror over one incident. And Rumsfeld said it best when in that one interview when they were asking him about the daisy cutters. They're like, you're using these bombs, then they kill people. And he was like, it's war. You kill people. Yeah. I mean, he was... He's a douche, but he was right. More eloquent and sinister than that on that comment. Like, yeah, somebody was, when they were asking about daisy cutters because they are effective. But yeah, I mean, I do want to hear your opinion, Matt. I think most people do want to hear your opinion for what you went through. And so I appreciate you giving it. Well, thanks. I didn't mean to get on my little soapbox. Listen, at the end of the day, we always are going to need men and women that are going to run to the sound of gunfire. We do, because there's evil out there legitimately. I mean, there are some really, really bad actors, either individuals or states, that are in orbit around us, and somebody's got to do it. But it's hard, and we haven't figured it out. We're great at starting, but we're not good at ending. That's for sure. Yeah, I mean, look, we're not great at nation building. Oh. That's, we could take Baghdad in a week or two, but, who wants to run it? Who wants to stay there and rule it? And that's not our business. And when you replace a dictator and just give somebody democracy, they're like, well, what's this? We just wanted a better dictator. We wanted the one we like. Yeah. Yep. If you don't fight and die for democracy as a thought and a way of life, then you're never going to appreciate it the way we used to anyway, or some of us still do. I mean, listen, General Powell, who had some really great moments and some not so great moments for sure. I'm kind of a fan of his.
he tossed out that back in 1993 on his way out, he was chairman.
Yeah, you break it, you pay for it.
And he's like, that we expected Jeffersonian democracy just to, pop up was mistaken. And like, that was 28 years ago. And how many times have we been thinking like, man, like you just said, why don't the Taliban, why don't the Northern Alliance, why doesn't Jaish al-Mahdi, why don't they listen?
Well, it's none of our business in the first place is why they don't listen. We're only ever going to be seen as, an extension of the Crusades in the Middle East forever. And they need to hash it out themselves. I think our foreign policy there should be rooted in, thou shalt not fuck with Israel or we'll end you. Other than that, deal with your own sectarian issues. Hopefully it's not violent, but you're just not going to take Israel because if for no other reason, they're the only functioning democracy in the Middle East.
Couldn't agree with you more. And by the way, like, give us some oil. How about that? And $4 a gallon is really starting to annoy me.
Yeah. That's my wife every single day. Calling her sisters about Biden. I mean, I don't know that it's his fault or it's not his fault, but it's this, everything was Trump's fault, to some people. So now Biden's got that whole thing going on. And as we sit here today talking to Matt, it's the day after the elections in Virginia and New Jersey. And it's just what we're talking about. Things are just going to now swing red. Is it better? I don't know. Probably better if you're a soldier. I don't know. But it's some crazy stuff. Just to wrap up Somalia, I always wanted to know, Colonel McKnight, was he that guy that Tom Sizemore played that just never bent over, never crouched down, never hid from gunfire? No, because that seems like that'd be stupid.
That was great Hollywood. That was great Hollywood. Danny McKnight is a far more paternal, I would say a far more paternal leader than the guy Tom Sizemore, portrayed. Definitely far more of a thinker than anything, but
most people are more of a thinker than Tom.
You got to have it. You got to have that in a movie. Some of these borderline caricatures, but yeah, that was Hollywood stuff.
I'm glad they did it because in the sense of Hollywood stuff, it was kind of cool Hollywood stuff, but I just couldn't help myself from thinking, dummy. Yeah. You're 6'4", bend over.
Exactly. Like,
get behind
cover
something.
Helps. Get behind something that's going to block bullets. That's a good thing.
But Colonel McKnight did do that. He got behind something. Okay. And you said there were SEALs there too. So this kind of debunks a little bit of, I don't know if it's a myth or the idea that SEALs and Delta don't operate together. They're either one or the other. In this case, these were SEALs and Delta operating together.
Yeah, I mean, you had Ranger, SEALs, Delta guys, and Task Force 160 all put together under one, little task force. So certainly that was 1993. And thinking about the last 20 years, I mean, throw in foreign special operations. And listen, this is all open source stuff. I'm not, giving any.
We just call them all operators now, right?
Yeah, that is it. And now, listen, I know it's not quite as simple as how we're chatting about it, but that habitually, this has been a kind of certainly on the soft side of the house is we're running hard, man. We gotta, for survival, figuratively, we've got to have more bodies and more well-trained bodies, and you can't just turn them out of that factory. So sort of by necessity, I think you kind of had to do this. But, back in the early 90s, though, there was a lot of this, Army, Navy kind of, friction, like, down to which company or which squadron or which this is going to go and whose turn is it for the next real world mission and all that kind of stuff, which takes a lot of ball sniffing and politics involved in who's getting the sticky end of the lollipop.
All right. Yeah. Well, which guys were tougher, the Delta or the SEALs?
No, the Rangers, of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
How do you not see that coming? How do you not see that? You didn't even include Rangers, and the guy's a Ranger. You're just, I mean, really, ER nurses. That's number one, and then the Rangers. There you go.
They are. I tell you what, though, they are tough. There's back to that whole thing. There's one of these. There's a quick anecdote to that point. One of these nurses is married to a Marine that had deployed. I don't know where he had deployed to, but they were she'd had a really shitty day, and he was sort of being a knucklehead. And you think, well, you don't know what it's like to scrape your buddy off the floor of a Humvee, and she's like, motherfucker, you didn't know what it's like to scrape a 2-year-old out of off of a gurney. Like, whoa, wow.
I know. I mean, like you and I were talking before the show, and a little bit, and I had shared with you we're both dog lovers, right? And that I had lost both my dogs within 2 months, a couple of months ago, and it just devastated me. Now, that's me. I'm I'm not you, and I didn't go through the Battle of Mogadishu. And, it surprised me a little bit. You said the same thing happens to you. Like you, not that you don't care deeply about the loss of human life, but the loss of your pets it was just as devastating.
Oh, yeah. And I know that to every listener, you're like, man, what? I can't believe I'm hearing this. And, but it really, it's just this numbness to that kind of, when you hear about death, it almost, logically, this is bad, but emotionally, it's like, I think my tears are gone. I don't think I think from Somalia actually started it I think I just don't. But my pets, I just break down like a 2-year-old.
Isn't that something?
It really is. I'm sure that there's some, psychologist that would tell me there's a log jam up there someplace that you got to figure out. But I've noticed it over time, and you hear, and thankfully, this hasn't been any kind of that inner circle of friends, but there've been certainly more than a few good friends that have passed away, and like you're sad for them, but it's not like you start crying uncontrollably. Yeah, no, it's a strange phenomenon. It really is.
Yeah, well, I lost a couple of Rhodesian Ridgebacks, and you would have thought that you would have thought I lost my best friend in Mogadishu too. It was it's crazy, and it was interesting to hear you say that too. That like compartmentalization that you have for different kinds of loss that you're prepared for, and then there's loss you're not prepared for, which will just physically and emotionally affect you differently. It must be quite interesting to go through that and then realize 20 years later, okay, I've still got that gene functioning.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And I must admit, it's just one of those, you just sort of choose to, accept it and kind of keep driving on. And again, I'm saying that, Dan, I'm such a tough guy or anything. It's just,
no, you are. Listen,
just the way it is.
Yeah. It's official. I mean, you got dropped into Bakara Market and thousands of Somalis were shooting at you. You can go ahead and say you're a tough guy. All right. I mean, like it could be 20 years ago, but they're outside of a few dozen others who were with you that day. And, God bless the 19 that didn't make it. I mean, I don't know how many were wounded. You were one of them, right? Everybody came out of there wounded.
Thankfully, the only thing I had got messed up on me was my hearing.
I bet.
But yeah, we had I think it was like 70 something wounded. That's a lot. There's a lot of fighting.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah, that is. Look, it's a wildly interesting story. I'm interested to hear what you've got coming up after ER nurses, about your business. If you maybe wrap up telling us what you have going on. You're retired from the military now, right? After how many You actually went to Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So it's not like when you're...
I was an Iraq guy. I was in Iraq for the surge from 06 to 07. And then I retired in 2008, thankfully. So I only had to do one. And my visit to Afghanistan was as a a chubby civilian. So, I was like, hey, this is kind of weird going back to a war zone with no gun. But yeah, no, 20 years, 3 months, and a couple of spare days on active duty, which I'm blessed for it, loved it. Even in the bad days, the military was good, and the army was good to me. I got no regrets about it, not zero.
The surge,
the transition challenge.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that in a sec. But the surge, we got to give it to McCain. He single-handedly made that surge happen when we were about to leave. Now, you can say that, we should be gone now, and I would be one of those guys, but had we had left in that moment, it would have been really, really bad. And McCain, who was not a war hawk, really was like, this is just math. And he really pushed that and got it done. Is that the way you saw it too?
Well, it was weird because I wasn't tracking who was the big proponent, since I was already over there. And the weird thing was that was announced on CNN, and my wife knew we were gonna be extended because of this surge before we knew on the ground in Iraq, which there's something fundamentally unsound about that. But
well, if I'm over there, I'm happy to hear more people are coming.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt.
Because Fallujah was still a shit show, right?
Oh my gosh, the whole country, all over the country. That was man, we could spend a lot of time dissecting the whole philosophy of Iraq and the de-Baathification and the Wolfowitz-Bremer. There's just a lot of... Yeah.
What did you think the Baathists were going to do? Did you think?
Yeah, check out, go for some ice cream. I'm like, what were you thinking? Truly, they would do? And again, it's one of those a couple of young corporals over a couple of beers and a cocktail napkin could come up with a little better. Hey, Corporal, what do you think's going to happen if we fire all of the military?
Every one of them.
They don't have anything to do. What do you think they're going to do for money?
TikTok, who knows?
Probably go and who would hire them? Jeez. Yeah. I mean, seriously, this is where it comes down to. That's exactly what happened.
I'll tell you, my grandfather was born in Mosul.
No kidding.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wow.
I'm half Assyrian. As you may know, the Iraq War was thorough in wiping out the rest of the Christians, the Assyrians and Yazidis among them. But here's an 80-some-year-old guy just saying, you're never gonna. What are you gonna win? What is there to win? Yeah. You'll never leave. You'll never get out of there. I mean, he spent his first 50 years there.
Wow.
So he called it in 2002 and 3 when it happened. He's just like, this is a huge mistake. And I thought he was a crazy old man. Oh, look, we just took that in 2 weeks. What are you talking about, Grandpa? I mean, this is ridiculous. You took what? What did you take?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're never going to leave. And then you're going to get rid of the entire military. What do you think they're going to do? And they should have, I think Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush should have called him and asked his opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. My gosh, yeah. I mean, again, I just, you hear that and it just incenses me. And listen, I'm a guy, to quite candid, I believe in strong defense. I'm a big...
This wasn't defense.
I probably am a hawk. I really probably that is me.
Me too, but this wasn't defense.
It was just, I'm reading sort of in the same church, different pew. There's a book out now called First Casualty, and it's about, the early CIA teams that go into Afghanistan. It's really, I'm only about 30 pages into it, but the history of Afghanistan and the explanation of, these tribes and these alliances and broken alliances, and that have happened all throughout time in Afghanistan, nothing's changed.
Oh,
I mean, literally, did anybody study any of this stuff before we got started and just think like,
no.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just throwing out gibberish.
People don't realize that imperial powers basically drew up lines on a map based on Gertrude Bell's little expeditions in the Middle East, but the strongest tribes got a country. The House of Suad got Saudi Arabia. Hashemite Empire of Jordan was given to King Hussein, and so on and so forth. But these were lines drawn by the French and the English that, to this day, Middle Easterners, I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, you were there, but they only really respect these lines during soccer games. Other than that, their tribe and their people mean more to them than their country and their religion, whether they're Sunni or Shia.
Listen, I mean, one of the generals, and I don't usually like to give generals too high a mark, but one of the generals over, in Afghanistan, he said it exactly right. He said, these people are living in houses built with baked bricks, like Moses made. They've never been across the mountain.
Straw.
And that's it. We laugh and chuckle and snort, but that is it. That is 100% it. How are we going to kind of cajole them into this, whatever it is that we're trying to do? I don't know, but apparently we think we can do it. And like you said, we haven't done a Marshall Plan lately, but one of these days.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that Marshall Plan really hurts us because it worked to a degree after World War II, and it's never going to work in the Middle East. And it's like you say, when you're raised with ignorance, the only information you have is your education. The only education that a lot of people have there, once they moved away from universities like they did in Iran back in the 50s, 60s, in Iraq, is what they're being told by their mullah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and at the madrasas and the schools and whatever. So it's a tough situation that I'm not keen on losing more American lives over. Not my decision. I think, our biggest issue right now, unless you disagree, is probably, China, Russia to a degree. And we need to really think about protecting our own hemisphere at this point, because they're leapfrogging from Africa, where they've gotten a lot of headway through their Belt and Road policy, and now they're getting over to South America, and they're going to fuck with us in our own hemisphere the way they think we do in theirs, or we do in theirs. Yeah,
no, I'm just making a note of that, because you just hit me with this whole Belt and Road thing. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And if I would nod my head vigorously to everything you said, and my only bolt on, is unfortunately, but we sort of touched on it earlier. I think we got to keep our eye in the rearview mirror, no matter how unpalatable it may be. That we've got to be watching what goes on in the Arabian Peninsula. We got to watch the Middle East. This sounds cliche. Throw something at the screen, but this idea that we create that vacuum,
it gets filled.
Create the terrorist playground, and who's going to be the one that feels good about holding that bag? I mean, you hope it doesn't happen. I hope none of it happens. But I would be really, 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 really unbelievably shocked if something didn't originate over in Afghanistan that bleeds out into us or our allies, and it'll be something kind of bad. And hope it doesn't. But you're right. It's a nasty place, this pebble we call a planet.
It's going to. Yeah, it's going to happen. And the Chinese are just interested in commerce. You think that Iran or Afghanistan and Islam is so important to them. You think they don't know they have Uyghur Muslims in prison camps? They know. But China doesn't screw with them and how they run their country. And that's the Faustian bargain, right? So we can just do commerce. Yeah, it's a tough situation. I'm sorry to say that there are going to be more Matt Eversman who put their lives on the line for us. Some of them won't come back. I appreciate that everything you've done. Tell us what you're doing now and what you got planned on in the future, and love to have you back when you're talking about a new venture.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And it's always good to end on a a little something a little lighter, a little more upbeat. But right in a moment.
Yeah, well, you're not exactly a Broadway actor, pal. So
Yeah,
we're not going to sing show tunes throughout this whole thing. It's gonna
exactly.
That's the hand you were dealt, Matt.
Yeah, no, and you pitched some good fastballs, and I like it. No, Jim and I are currently working on another book about law enforcement, which is absolutely fascinating.
Go to Minneapolis.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, no, I've talked to cops up there. It's really quite remarkable. So that I don't have a date for that one, but we're still interviewing, and we got that to look forward to. As far as my real time job, and you're very kind to announce it at the beginning. My wife and I started this little consultancy called Eversmann Advisory, which really was born out of frustration of this transition experience from active duty to the new professional life. And 3 jobs in 10 years left me very frustrated. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, how come this is happening? How come my shelf life is about 3 years, and then I either get fired, the company goes under, or it's not a love connection. I realized that I was the long answer, not so long, was I was chasing money to keep up with a lifestyle, and instead of chasing an opportunity, or I don't want to say passion, because I think that gets overused, but looking for something that I really
something fulfilling anyway,
really was interested in. And nobody really taught me that lesson, let alone how to follow and find myself in this new world and this new identity. So before we went back to let's go find another job that I'll hate, how about sharing some of these lessons learned with soldiers, so that we can shorten their learning curve, or maybe make it steeper, I guess, but shorter. Get all this stuff out there, teach them what they need to know, so that they can be more competitive out here in this real world, which I think a lot of them can. Again, we talk about what is a 26-year-old, team leader in Mogadishu or Afghanistan or, Jalalabad do. They can do a lot. And so we got to kind of help them find their way. So that really is a very broad overview of what we've done. I've been always intrigued with this idea of emerging leaders, and military or not, but the young professionals. How do we take the lessons learned from the special operations community in the military, which arguably, while not perfect, is really pretty doggone good, and how do we transfer that out here to these young men and women that didn't serve, for whatever reason, but we could help, not quite recreate, but we could take the good of the good and put it into them, so they could come be, as successful out here as, a Delta or a SEAL, Carl. I mean, they could be one of them too. And, but be top of the steer. Not an actual SEAL, Carl. Not an actual SEAL.
My nephew just graduated from Ranger School, so.
Oh, good for him. Awesome.
Oh, wow. Takes after his father's side, I take it.
No.
Okay. So this is good for anybody listening that's maybe getting out of the military and finding a transition that's rough, as Matt did. They can reach out to you, I guess, and get some help.
Yeah, listen, we look. I always say yes. I always say yes to helping anybody. About whatever it is they can do, and it's not a silver bullet.
Wasn't that Eversman Advisory?
Yeah, you can just Google it or go on LinkedIn, either one, and I'm not hard to find.
Okay.
But again, this is we don't teach you that. Nobody teaches this, and it's important, because the kids that have done so much, man, they just deserve another crack at a nice, the white picket fence and dog in the yard. Like, they don't have to suffer anymore. They come out, be competitive, get a good job, and feel rejuvenated and refreshed and excited about work. That's great. I mean that needs to be done. I appreciate you're doing it. Look forward to your next book about law enforcement, whatever categories you cover there.
I'm certainly going to pick it up.
Don't read it in a police station, though.
Don't read it while I'm being arrested.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do. I'm sure a lot of people would love to see that. Ask the corporate world, right? There you go. Thank you very much, Matt, for joining us today, for everything you've done, for the stuff you're going to do in the future. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I didn't get a chance to watch the movie with you, but I felt like I kind of did. So hopefully the audience did too. Any final words on how to reach you? Twitter? Do you have social media you want people to?
No, I'm the worst. I'm the worst salesman. I'm a jackass. The social media annoys me to no end, to be quite candid. I'm not trying to be a curmudgeon.
Totally agree.
But yeah, no, LinkedIn or just Google it. You can get me.
Okay.
Yeah, listen, I would just toss this out, and this is my last, and I'll shut up. But there's so much good in this country. There is so much doggone good in this country.
Yeah.
You only got to spend about 5 seconds in any of these other places that we've talked about to realize this is a pretty great place, this land we live in. And, don't forget it. And, whatever side you're on, it really, unless you're the really like evil side, but if you're, that's what makes this country great. And, just be civil. But this is a great place.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you're a lawmaker from Somalia and, you're complaining about our country, you should actually tell people what it's like in Somalia.
Yeah.
Or Matt will.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
All right.
Exactly. All right, man.
Everybody, I hope you felt like you were there a little bit. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the podcast, give us a comment, give us a retweet. If you didn't enjoy it, move to Minneapolis or Somalia. And to our listeners, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, leave us a comment, give us a retweet, follow us on Twitter. Thanks for joining us.